Good evening, everyone. I wanted to welcome you to the 918th meeting of the Amateur Telescope Makers of Boston. You're all welcome. We've got a full crowd here. I see a lot of friendly faces. I see some unfriendly faces. I specifically wore a kilt today to get them, get them off kilter. Wouldn't get to us.
All we want to know is, were you one of the ones that wish you were?
This is a kilt. It's not
No,
a
but
skirt.
is that because you wish you were?
All right. So let's move on. We have a great meeting, action-packed business, and a great presentation plan. So hope you all enjoy it. And I did want to say happy anniversary to ATMoB. It's the 85th anniversary of our club this month. So it's really exciting. We're the oldest amateur organization in the United States, so it's really exciting. And we're an amateur astronomy club devoted to making telescopes, observing, and studying the heavens. ATMoB was
1930.
It's supposed to say 1930.
Yeah.
This is a
we're
different.
number 2.
Sorry, let's talk later. With the cooperation.
So we founded Stellafane.
1924.
All right. In 1973, the Bond Association, Astronomical Society merged, and we became the longest-standing club in the United States, from what I understand. This is straight from the website, so. I think I love history, and I think one of the obviously ATMoB is a really prestigious organization. What we need to do is renew the historical aspect of the club, and I'm going to nominate Mario, since he knows so much about the dates here, to actually play a role in this. So
I'm retired.
Hey, we can have MAGA hat, make them all great again.
There we go. Let's do that. It's the Observing Committee report with Glenn and Bruce.
I'm still alive. First of all, I hate throwing away anything that's related to astronomy, and I have a past calendar, one of the astronomy calendars. And when I was a teacher, I used to take some of these monthly pictures and I just put them up around the room there for decoration. So this will be in the back if anybody wants it. I also have a couple of copies of the RASC Observer's Handbook, and I know some of you religiously get this every year. And again, when the year is over, the part that's useless, of course, is the calendar section. But everything else is pretty good. There's a lot of good observing information in here. And there are a lot of lists of objects to look at. They have the whole NGC, or the finest NGCs, finest double stars, and so forth. So I'll have these up back, and I certainly encourage you to help yourself to them. Now, as far as what's going on, how many of you here are morning people? All right, skip the next slide. Just go ahead. Go ahead.
You didn't want to say anything about Richard?
Oh, you know what happened? Jim Mullaney, some of you familiar, he used to work for Sky and Telescope years ago. He sent me a whole bunch of quotations. Now, he's very much into backyard astronomy, observational astronomy. So I try to put in a quote every time. And this one I like. The night under the stars rewards the bug bites, the cloudy skies, the next day fuzzies, and the thousands of frustrations with priceless moments of sublime beauty. And that was from Richard Berry, the former editor of Astronomy magazine, and of course, very accomplished writer as well. Now the next, to what you don't care about, since you're all night people, pretty much everything here is happening in the morning. Now, I put down the one for March 21st. I know Bruce is here. This is something that might be of interest. We talked this over. The asteroid Berger is going to pass in front of a 12th magnitude star. In Massachusetts, we're right in the middle of the track, and there's a 100% chance of seeing something. That's the good news. A couple of bad things, that occurs at about 2:11 in the morning, so you really have to be up for this. Also, that's around the time of a full moon, so you're going to have to deal with a full moon. And also, with 2:11, Gemini is going to be just hitting the horizon, so I don't even know if we'd have to almost investigate if it's going to be clear in that area around the clubhouse. I tend to say probably not, but it's something certainly worth looking at. Oh, very low. That's I don't have the exact elevation, but it's going to be kind of just cruising the treetops. Yeah, it's going to be pretty close to it. I don't know if it's just something to be kind of neat. If I can find a nice wide open area and I can stay up at 211, I might give it a shot just with a back-out telescope. A couple of morning pair-ups, Jupiter and the Moon on the morning of the 27th, Saturn and the Moon on the morning of the 29th. Friday and Saturday, March 30th and 31st. Are we doing a Messier marathon? I don't think anybody can even live through a whole night anymore. Is there anything in the works right now? I think the last time there was one, I think...
Nothing official, but I think there's something on the calendar suggesting the nights that would work the best.
Yeah, Michael Brown and I did it a couple of years ago. I was at 99, trying to get that 100, and I'm fussing over a couple of obscure objects in Aquarius someplace, and I totally forgot about M15. And when I finally I got to nail that thing, it was just too light. So I ended up with 99. That's like a baseball player hitting 299 for batting average, or a pitcher winning 19 games. You wanted that last one. On April 2nd, nice little gathering. Venus, Mercury, and thin waxing crescent moon together in the east-southeast. Venus-Neptune conjunction coming up on April 10th. And then Mercury at its greatest western elongation. All of these not only are early in the morning, but they're very low. That's one thing. So it's really not a great month as far as naked eye observing. But the Venus-Neptune one might be worth a check. They'll be about a half a degree apart. But Venus is going to be very low again, about 45 minutes before sunrise. So these will all be challenges for the most part.
So we all go to Mario's, just bring him coffee.
Oh, the challenges. It's no longer the LVAS challenge, by the way. It's now just the Observer's Challenge, as was requested by Roger Ivester. And we have a neat pair up here, NGC 2300, which is this object right here. But as I was doing the research on that, we had a galaxy right next door to it, NGC 2276. So we did look at them not too long ago. And this is the featured object. It's about 11th magnitude. It's something like 2 by 3 arc minutes across. It's an elliptical galaxy, but some people think it might be a lenticular galaxy, which is basically a spiralless spiral. So the exact type is not really well known. NGC 2276 is a kind of a distorted spiral galaxy. And it's so odd that Halton Arp put this in his catalog. I think this was object, and I've written it down here, Arp 25. But then, because these two are kind of unusual being so close together, they're only about 6 arc minutes apart, he put them together as a pair and he cataloged them as Arp 114. So these galaxies appear twice in his catalog. What makes them interesting is they're both about as close as NGC objects can get to the North Pole, the North Star. NGC 188, you're all familiar with, is about 3.5 arc minutes away. So are these two galaxies as well. We did check them out with a telescope. I know Rich Steve with the 18-inch. And this one was no trouble, but this one was very tough. I think we'll all agree. And I can't speak for them, but with a kind of medium-high power, I was able to see this one barely with averted vision. We went to high power. We were able to, I couldn't see it with high power.
Medium power worked best for me, but you're right. It was just on the. If you asked me to draw the boundary of it, I wouldn't have been able to.
No, just very.
You almost can tell where it's not. So you just kind of see it. And then also just make a picture, people know that's an insert. Mario, that's your image, right?
Oh, that's very good.
But that's an insert. That's not the way it looks in the sky.
No, that's Mario's work. That's the way it looks through Mario's telescope. And
That's a 2-hour exposure.
so
Mario,
it is tough.
Mario, when you enlarge it, you can see the starburst regions, right? In 2276?
Right up here.
Yeah.
You know what's interesting? You got the laser pointer? This is what's fascinating. After I took this, I was interested in this guy. See all these knots? Those are all Chaple. It's a starburst galaxy. So I looked it up. Turns out this knot right here, which is a big one, that's a 50,000 mass black hole in the periphery of the galaxy.
Yeah.
Harvard is doing, the CFA is doing studies on this for the last few years with the Chandra. And the reason is, remember last month we heard about small black holes and big ones? Here's one of the few medium-sized black holes ever found. It's on the periphery of that galaxy.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
And I think something like 10 supernovae have been discovered in this galaxy in the last 60 years. There's a lot of activity. So again,
It's a starburst.
this is a featured object. This is the one that's getting a lot of attention and interest. So try to get them both. Yes.
Yeah, so on Monday night, Jim Geddes and I took a picture from Ario.
Wow.
We have, I have 10, 20 2-minute exposures stacked. I think Tom might be able to show it, although not now. No, we can't. I can show it on my phone, but it's a tough one. It's a tough one to get, but it's actually the field is pretty rich in galaxies. There's a lot of, I think they're PGC objects, PNC, PGC objects.
I think Mario captured a couple, kind of hard with the lights on and everything, but.
Yeah, the background is filled with small fuzzies, but it doesn't project.
There's a lot of them.
But this will attest how faint that galaxy is, by the way. This one was discovered in 1871, and even though this one is in the same eyepiece field, this wasn't discovered until about 10 years later. And again, 1871 is not that long ago, so they're very hard to pick up, but it's a good challenge, very worthwhile.
I'm not going to cut anyone off, but I do want to. But I can say Corey had an excellent image of this on the open night. Did a great job of that. So I'll do a shout out for Corey when he has open telescope night. You go on YouTube, and he's had some amazing images, and he's doing a fantastic job. So check it out.
I'm a little tickled with his little 4-inch. He got almost as much detail as that.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So nice job, Corey.
Thanks.
Okay. Anybody have anything to add or anything? Yes, young man.
Today is not only Pi Day, but it's Albert Einstein's birthday.
How old would he have been?
Always go with Mario.
He said it's all relative.
I don't know, the kettle black. I don't think that's new business. I think that's old business.
Hey, again, keep looking up and clear skies.
And with regard to old business, we do have old business. So I did want to make a book announcement. John already mentioned it in his report but Shallow Sky, and you can go on Amazon, I believe, and Apple Books. Yep. So check it out. Buy it. You know? Our own.
Do it. Thank you.
Yeah. And Mario, again, we announced his website, and I think the link is correct. Yep. So check that out too. And don't buy that, but. And one thing, old business, I wanted to pass on a note from Camille, who was our speaker last month, and she was nice enough to respond posthumously to a question that was made by, not possible, post-meeting. So someone had asked a question about dark matter and whether it could be passed into the dark hole. She didn't know the answer to that, and she said that it's unlikely in that gases and dust can fall in the black hole only when they lose angular momentum. So, and that's primarily through friction and magnetic turbulence. But dark matter, as far as it's currently known, it doesn't interact with itself, so it would not necessarily lose its angular momentum and fall into the black hole. So she wanted me to pass this along, and I've accomplished that. So again, she did a great job. So if you do meet up with her, thank her. Really great. So any questions, comments, or Bruce?
Can I make an announcement? Sure. So some of you know that, and some of you, sorry about that, know that Kelly Beatty and I founded almost 6 years ago the Maine Astronomy Retreat and Symposium, or MARS for short. And it's grown and grown. It's a star party like no other. You have a private cabin, running water, the whole thing, real beds, 3 home-cooked meals a day. Last year, we had astronaut Don Pettit spend the week with us. So we've got basically 40 people, and you're one-on-one, or 40-on-1 with the astronaut. This year, we just got confirmation that Dava Sobel is going to be our guest for the entire week. Dava, if you don't know, is the author of a book called Longitude, about how clocks came to be that would work on ships so that ships could figure out where they were. Glass Universe, Galileo's daughter. She's going to be up there for almost the entire week. If you're interested in going, it's astronomyretreat.com. And we are limited to about 40 people. We've already got, Scott just told me tonight that he signed up, and There are several other ATMoB members that are signed up, so maybe we'll see some of you there.
Thank you.
What's that? Oh, I'm sorry. It's July 28th to August 3rd. So it's a Sunday to a Saturday.
So it overlaps.
It overlaps with Stellar things. Yeah. Yep, it does.
Okay,
Thank you.
anything else? Okay, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Hugh Blair-Smith. The topic of his talk is going to be left brains for the right stuff. And he has a book that he's just recently written, and he has copies here for sale, $21, I believe. And I think he'll even sign for an extra $21. but Hugh Blair-Smith was MIT Instrumentation laboratory from 1959 to 1981, designed guidance, navigation hardware and software for the Apollo, and fault toleration software for the Space Shuttle. And he will explain what all that means in the end. But really happy. He has a storied career, lots of stories. I'm very, very much interested in hearing from you regarding the work that he's done. And it's very timely, as everyone is probably aware. 50th anniversary of the Apollo landing is coming up. And I'm hoping we'll have some more topics on that as we get closer to July. So without further ado, thank you to you. I really appreciate it.
You don't have the you do have the laser pointer. Oh, there we are. Okay, it's separate. No, different.
We do have a clicker for one of these.
Oh, really? Okay. Just while this is going on, as an old actor in my school days, I learned to project, so I don't think I'm going to need the amplifier. So if you can, in the back, can you hear me okay? Yes. Okay, good. So where are we on here? Yeah.
Next. And
Oh, I'm sorry.
I can double it down.
Oh, I see. I didn't realize it was here. Okay. Now this slide is a hidden slide. It isn't really here, but since it's here, I'll tell you what it was. I got involved. My boat is named for the first boat to pay toll at the Cape Cod Canal Company on the first day of business in 1914. So this was 2014. I tried to get involved in a reenactment of the paying of the toll, and the gods of diesel engines did not cooperate, unfortunately. So, so this is kind of the best thing that remains out of that. And for some reason, this was officially a hidden slide. I don't know why it's there, because this is the real beginning. Anyhow, one thing I just like to do before I get started, introduce my good friend Amy Schneider. She and her husband live in Newton, and they're my hosts for many visits that I make in the Boston area. And she's also very curious about all the strange things I get mixed up in. So there she is. Okay. Anyhow, so I did finish the book. I got published just 2 months after my 80th birthday, so I sort of got on with it. Anyhow, the whole space race and the Apollo and the moon race and the space race was composed of these 4 strands. Those 3 sciences, which of course began a long time ago, and a new breed of engineer called systems engineer to put them together. So again, start off with some long ago history. Rocket lore. We started in 1567 with Wernher, who decided to be the fastest human on Earth. The Chinese at that time had been making for about 500 years, making rockets they call fire arrows. And so they had a lot of, according to Wernher, they had a lot of specific impulse and other good boosting qualities, and so he wanted to take advantage of that. We'll see more about that in a minute. Johannes Kepler, I don't need to explain him to you, but how many people know that Cyrano de Bergerac was one of the most solid scientific writers of his day? Aside from the sword and the nose, the fellow had a brain, and he used it. I think that's just amazing. Oops, was that supposed to be here? Make that go away? Maybe,
Escape key.
No.
yeah, well, you're good. Oh, okay, good. In India, British India, there were some rebels rebelling against the British Raj, and they got from the Chinese some rockets. And suddenly the British understood that rockets could be used as weapons. So Whitehall got busy and got Mr. Congreve to invent rockets that were then used in 1812. And they produced Red Glare and some pretty good poetry, but didn't actually do much to Fort McHenry, as we know. Jules Verne, what do I do to make this thing light up here?
There's a little button on it.
That little button. Oh, I see. So Jules Verne, everybody knows about Jules Verne. He's been, of course, an enormous inspiration for everybody in the space business. Edward Everett Hale how many people ever read anything by Edward Everett Hale? He was a few people, but he sort of anticipated GPS by suggesting that a huge brick satellite be put up in polar orbit to help people with longitude. Okay, so here's one who is in his chair, he's got his seatbelt properly fastened, he's got his air brakes ready to deploy, and his 47 fire arrows. So we have a countdown here. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, blammo. That's what was left. And that's why solid fuel rockets were not man-rated for another 400 years. So, just a glimpse here of Cyrano writing the comical history of the states and empires of the worlds of the moon and sun. And he understood how much of people's understanding of science was total bull roar, and so he wrote it very logically. I kind of wish he'd come back and help some of our people today. And of course, Jules Verne, here's his painter for the cover of his book. Didn't really understand much about zero gravity and what it was like to travel in space, but Jules Verne himself, he understood about microgravity and all that good stuff. He really got just about everything right. So, that's rocket science. If we start talking about the long ago parts of navigation, the other thing the Chinese got way ahead of us, they had magnetic compasses in around 1100, and European navigators knew a good thing when they saw it, they snapped it up. Shiplog, we learned how to measure the speed of a boat through the water. We had some clocks, and if you know what direction you're going, when you started, how fast you're going, then you can compute, if you're at all clever, by dead reckoning where you are now. And as sailors, we tend to do that maybe every couple hours, maybe every day, maybe we just don't bother half the time if our GPS is working. But in any case, the art of dead reckoning is the mathematical approach to navigation. We all know how to do latitude by celestial observation, certainly in this room. Longitude, much bigger problem, and it depended, among other things, on great books of tables around 1800. Nathaniel Goddard, instead of playing soccer with the boys, his idea of a good time was to go over his family books of mathematical tables for navigation and find errors and errors and errors and errors. So he published the American Practical Navigator, which became H09, the 9th book published by the Hydrographic Office. But going back to longitude, if you know from Davis Sauvel, you know about Admiral Sir Cloudesley Shovel. I mean, you cannot make these names up. And you know the role of John Harrison and the prize put up by Parliament, and how John Harrison couldn't collect it until he complained to King George III, who made it happen finally. So just to illustrate that point a little bit, we have a scene here This is a fleet of the Royal Navy under the command of Admiral Sir Cloudesley Shovel. On the way back from the area roughly off Cape Finisterre, on the way back to England, he held a meeting on his ship of about 20-some navigators. With one exception, they all agreed on how was the right the place. They hadn't had any longitude sights for a few days. They all agreed on what was the right way to get back to safe harbor in England. There was one holdout. The holdout was right. The other fellows were wrong. So there's the rocks. This was an incredible disaster. Over a dozen ships lost, 2,000 sailors, just a total catastrophe. So Parliament put up a prize for somebody who could make a clock that would help these guys find their longitude better. And a lot of the high-ranking establishment resisted, but this little Yorkshire clockmaker finally came up with H1. And if you've ever been to the Greenwich Observatory in London, you'll see H1 through H4. But this is the first object that could go on a ship and keep time through all kinds of crazy motions, crazy weather, crazy everything else. So that's a great sight. Yeah?
The challenge before that, of course, was that the clocks ran by pendulums, and it's awful difficult to keep accurate time on the ship.
Yeah,
with a pendulum clock.
too much pendulum action by a great deal. Yes, that is quite so. So H1 solved the problem, but it took almost the full length of John Harrison's professional life to collect the reward, the considerable 20,000 pounds, whatever it was, from Parliament and head housekeeping from the King. Okay, so that was a major advance in that sort of thing. If we shift now to the art of computer science, I started off mentioning the math race. Isaac Newton in England versus Gottfried Leibniz in Germany. You can still get into a fight in certain bars and universities in Europe over who really did invent calculus first. But the point about calculus is it so improved the art of mathematical analysis that nobody needed computers for a while. The analytical stuff worked very well. Joseph-Marie Jacquard invented industrial process control, a tapestry loom that ran by punched cards, and you'll see a little bit more about that. Charles Babbage, one of the badly socialized nerds of his age in the 1840s. He also noticed, as Bowditch did, the books were full of errors, and so his comment on the calculations was, "I wish all these calculations had been done by steam." That was the highest level of, that was high-tech in those days. So he put together brass wheels and gears, made a thing he called a difference engine, a more general purpose computer called an analytical engine, and Ada Lovelace, the only legitimate daughter of the poet Byron, appointed herself the first woman in computer science, and it made a great difference. And so I put it in the book. I made up a little nice story in the book about how she won his confidence. In the meantime, in terms of electricity, Volta was active around 1800, involving the battery, Ampere, the electromagnetism, Morse, we know the telegraph and the relays as a sort of first piece of electrical logic, you might say. And finally, electronic switches and amplifiers. So all these things sort of laid the groundwork for computers. On the left, you see Babbage's computer. This may be a replica, and what he was trying to build was probably more like 50 or 100 times this much. But people making gears couldn't really fulfill the goals. So that's just a little pilot model. So that's all they ever got to build was that. Mr. Jacquard over here decided that he would like to demonstrate the power of his. Now these punch cards are about so long by about so high. I've seen a modern Jacquard loom at MIT of all places. Anyhow, he sat down and carefully punched 24,000 of these cards so that they would weave a tapestry, and this is the tapestry. In 1800, that's what it took to make a selfie. Hard work. Okay, so I took as an example of a system engineer, the one I know best, that I see in the mirror for whatever that's worth. I did have a job as a computer at Harvard for a few weeks, which is to say, like the ladies in that wonderful movie Hidden Figures, just driving a mechanical calculator for somebody's research before computers were sufficiently available and existed, but most professors couldn't somehow get any access to them. I also had a summer job in a factory and learned all about don't work too fast, but I found that uncongenial, and that's just as well. Okay, so those are the long ago beginnings. Here's where things get a little more scientific. Konstantin Tsiolkovsky. He was your total book nerd. Did all the math for rocket guidance and rocket physics, but he didn't tinker. All the tinkering was done right here in Massachusetts by Robert Goddard, putting together a gasoline and liquid oxygen rocket. Of course, people told him, "Oh, you damn fool! That's not going to work. There's no," or no, he said that rockets would work in space. And that caused people to say to him, "Well, you damn fool, there's no air to push against. What are you talking about? That's not going to work." So he sort of demonstrated that the rocket is pushing on the front end of the chamber, not on the air. Over in Germany, Hermann Oberth taught various people, including Wernher von Braun, how to do rockets. He was also the first one to advise a movie maker on how to do a scene set in space. The movie was called Frau im Mond, The Woman in the Moon. At the end of World War II, of course, the Germans, we needed to get as many as we could, so keep them out of the hands of the Russians. And so they were brought to this country, put to work in the Southwest, where there wasn't a lot of press coverage, which was just as well, because there was a rule that nobody who had been a Nazi, even a little bit, could come to America and do anything. So the Army made up somewhat more favorable biographies of all these chaps and paperclipped them to their personnel files, and that's what Operation Paperclip was all about. So that's how we got Wernher von Braun. Then we have an oddball fella, S. Fred Singer. Anybody ever hear of Fred Singer? He's a total a denier of everything. Yep. But he did.
Not a denier.
What?
Not a denier.
Right.
He questions it.
Well, okay. He does it with an attitude.
And orbital, I'm sorry, the unmanned satellite of Earth.
Minimum orbital, right. And so for pictures, we've got Goddard with his rocket there in Auburn, I think, Massachusetts. And here's the picture that was published in Life magazine that kind of caught my interest around 1950 or whenever he did this. That's what the mouse was supposed to look like. And I have to say, as satellites go, that looks rather densely heavy for a satellite to me, but it's just a...
Is that whole thing a satellite?
Is it what?
Is that whole thing a satellite?
The whole
Like
thing.
cube satellites that are being launched now?
Is the whole thing a satellite?
There's the whole thing, well, yeah, this whole thing is just a satellite, right? And so it would be, put on top of a rocket and launched. Anyway, shifting now to the greater development of navigation. Everybody, now we probably have some pilots in the room who are very familiar with pitot tubes for measuring their speed, but I'll bet you didn't know they were invented in 1732 to measure the speed of barges in the French canals. That's what Monsieur Pitot was doing. So anyhow, that was picked up and combined with altimeters for airplanes. As soon as there was radio navigation began early. Gyro compassing, Kaiser Wilhelm's World War I German Navy had gyro compass navigation. Elmer Sperry created the gyro autopilot, and to show it off, he he took a plane and his son to the Paris Air Show and had his son fly this plane, 43 feet over the heads of the crowd. And while he was doing that, he put his hands out. Look, everybody, no hands. But it worked. So that was a good thing, too. And in 1930s, Charles Draper at MIT, he was not the first to think of inertial navigation, but he was the first to do it. And so this is basically the art of dead reckoning, but carried to electronic extremes. Instead of doing your dead reckoning every 2 hours, as we do with sailors, how about 10 times a second, or at least once per second? And so that's what the gyros and the accelerometers in an inertial system actually do. So he wanted to prove this. There was a conference in California in 1953. The subject was, do you suppose inertial navigation will ever be any use in aviation? So he had this thing he called Spire, and he put it on a B-29 and got a pilot to sit in the pilot's seat, but the inertial navigation unit flew the plane to California, landed correctly. Doc and his buddies got up at the conference and said, well, I think we know the answer. Here we are. So that was kind of Doc. But one way or another, it was pretty clear that something like general purpose digital computers are really going to be needed. Just why they were invented so many different places in the 30s. In Germany, Konrad Zuse made one he called Z1 in 1936. It was more mechanical, but he did electronic ones later. But of course, as soon as we got our B-17s into Europe, we bombed all those things and burned up their designs and all that. In our own Midwest, John Atanasoff and Cliff Berry, and you were talking about somebody else, Berry, I don't know if Cliff has any relation. But in 1939, Atanasoff was on a road trip to Indiana, and while he was driving, he just saw how to make a computer out of vacuum tubes. I guess there wasn't any traffic. He got where he was going. Back. So these guys, they called it the Atanasoff-Berry computer and started showing it off in 1939. A Bell Labs guy, George Stibitz, sort of showed off what we now call cloud technology. Alan Turing at Bletchley, to untangle the Enigma codes, created computers he called bombs, which I think this means is French for gadget. Maybe we have a French expert here who can help with that. At Harvard, Howard Aiken had worked with IBM to create the Harvard Mark I, which went online in 1944. And in my book, I didn't know the real answer. What I'd understood at the time was that what Harvard Mark I was doing was artillery tables for naval ships. What I've learned since, and I have to put it in the second edition if I ever make one, is that what it was doing was it was computing nuclear bomb problems. So, but even in 1956, they didn't tell us that. So the second absolutely great woman in computer science is Grace Hopper, a Navy officer. And the second Harvard computer called Mark II was run by relays like the first one, and a moth got into the relay points and died, thereby producing an installation where it shouldn't have been. As soon as the tech pulled the moth out, Grace Hopper said, "That's great, save that, put it in your logbook, this is history." Because, of course, it was the first computer bug. A couple of people named Eckert and Mauchly who were, Eckert, I think it was, sort of stole Atanasoff's ideas, but they made the ENIAC, one of the first very primitive, very enormous computers. They then founded UNIVAC, and John von Neumann was the one who sort of refined the architecture to the way we see it today. So here's some examples. There's the Atanasoff-Berry computer. I think the program is made by sticking pins in this thing like a music box. Over in Bletchley, here's Colossus. If you know the Enigma story, you know that at one point the Germans decided they'd better upgrade it, and they made it something called Lorentz, which was much harder to deal with. So Turing and his friends upgraded their gear and made Colossus. So there's obviously a lot of vacuum tubes there. We know what they were doing. There's a lot of belts and stuff. I don't know what the heck they were doing, but obviously it was very important to get the job done. And over in Harvard, here's how Harvard Mark I looked when I had my first computer course there in 1956. There was the whole thing. You got your output here, the 4 typewriters. You got your program storage here, loops of stiff paper tape. You got your data storage here, and way down the end you got constant switches, so you can put in just to dial in mechanically numbers. A lot of this is still preserved in the Harvard Science Center, so if you ever go there, take a look. They basically took, I'm going to say about a quarter of the stuff there, just preserved it there. And they occasionally turn on the motor and let it run. I don't think it does a whole lot.
Why would you have used that when the IBM 701, they were already to the 704 by then?
Well, okay, you're asking about 1956
Yeah.
when I came there. Well, what we have that was modern at the time was the UNIVAC 1. And that's, actually, I'm going to come to that here on this slide here. The UNIVAC 1 was just obsolete enough in 1956 that UNIVAC gave a copy to Harvard. And suddenly there was enough computing resources there so that even undergraduates, such as your humble servant, could go and play with it. So, but the Mark I was there because it had always been there, as perhaps the answer to your question, since 1944. Mark IV was still very much in use for a lot of research projects. And so when I went in, the business of getting used to the UNIVAC 1 was really just getting started. Most of its working time was spent on translating Russian. Anyhow, so right in here, that's where Sputnik was, October 4th, 1957. Like everybody else, I was pretty impressed by that. I got into a sort of moonlight project with an MIT guy, and so I left working for Harvard, which I've been doing, moved down to MIT and started working on a computer, a very compact computer, to take an Air Force probe to Mars. There wasn't any NASA yet at that time, or I guess it existed, hadn't really got around to figuring how to do anything. So I got involved in that, and primarily my first assignment was write a cross assembler for an unknown number of machines with unknown characteristics. Well, it wasn't quite that bad, but somehow I had 1 foot in software and 1 foot in hardware through at that time. I won't take time to tell you about this other project about the mouse fart. It's a very, very low thrust rocket, 1/4 pound of thrust. And then we come to 1961, and of course Yuri Gagarin goes into orbit, and JFK goes into his own orbit and challenges the Congress and the country. So, now the background for what that meant is, of course, what I think is properly called realpolitik. We sort of figured out how to do mutual assured destruction in the hope that it would prevent anybody from destroying anyone, because nobody can win. Lenin, the Lenin idea in Soviet Union was still make world leadership. Stalin had a more realistic view that what he wanted was invulnerability and make backward Russia some kind of superpower. Sergei Korolev was the leading rocket designer, and so he sort of solved Khrushchev's dilemma, said, okay, the USSR is going to be supreme in space technology, and around this time NASA is born and JFK starts his business. So this is the 2 approaches. On the left, missiles versus missiles. On the right, I believe this nation should commit itself before the decade is out to sending a man to the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. So we had a project. And the NASA pieces were in Houston, Mission Control, in Huntsville, developing the huge Saturn rocket, in Cape Canaveral, all the launches, that sort of thing. The MIT Instrumentation Lab, designed the computer and all the navigation and control instruments. Raytheon built the computer. AC spark plug, which is a piece of General Motors, built the gyro and accelerometer units to our design. IBM was busy building an independent unit just for the Saturn rocket. We'll have another look at those in a little bit. And so they introduced triple redundant computers so that any one unit, any one circuit could fail, but the whole thing would still work by 2 out of 3 votes. And North American was charged with doing a command module and a service module, and we'll see what those are like in a moment. And then once a big decision was made, Grumman was set off doing the lunar module. So what was that all about? You could get men to the moon, but how are they going to get back? What you land on the moon has got to be so enormous that even the Saturn rockets we had in mind could design would not be enough. So one stubborn guy, a fellow named Cobalt, I think, said, hey, how about a lunar orbit rendezvous? You have a little lightweight lunar module to go down to the surface and bring you guys back up to lunar orbit, and they do a rendezvous in orbit around the moon. And he finally convinced them that, look, everything about this mission is risky. We know how to do, at that time when we were learning through Gemini how to do rendezvous induction. So NASA, unlike any government agency you ever saw, sort of sucked it and said, okay, I guess we got to do it. So that began to give us a feeling for how we might be getting somewhere by 1968. And if you know the song, you can go along with me. Sing the song of Megabucks, a rocket full of pie. Happy Pi Day, by the way. 4 and 20 astronauts blasted through the sky. When the hatches open, the taxpayers will cheer. Now isn't that the hell of a thing to do in election year? Yes. All right. So now we've been making clever computers to operate unmanned spacecraft, and something, oh Christ, now we've got to interface not only with the real world, but with people. How are we going to do that? Well, our initial approach is, well, all right, our computer knows how to do everything. Here's what the people can do. They sit there just waiting to see whether they have to push the abort button. I mean, these 2 cartoons were drawn by the somebody in the lab. The astronaut's idea, of course, is no matter how busy it is, we're smart, we'll do everything. Well, there's a little bit too much of everything. So the compromise was the astronauts make the decisions, but the Apollo guidance computer does the work. And if you happen to see NOVA on December 26th, you saw me as one of the talking heads there, mentioning things like, well, if you want to operate everything on the spacecraft manually, you'd better have 17 fingers and be really, really nimble. So anyway. Okay, so we started off with what we had at the time, which was even dinkier than what you remember now. And the prototype that we designed for the Mars mission, not big enough, not fast enough, not reliable enough. So our chief designer, Eldon Hall, looked around and said, hey, integrated circuits are a good answer to this. To which most of the government people said, what are you talking about? Well, there was a little bit of a track record for integrated circuits. And Fairchild was making them. Each chip had, count them, 3 transistors, just enough to make a 3-input NOR gate. But nevertheless, we jumped in and we used, I don't know whether it's a third or a half, but we were an early adopter. We used all the integrated circuits there had ever been, a fair portion. And then 2 years later, we needed more speed, more memory capacity, so we made what we call a Block 2 model, about 10 times the computer we started with. So that's how we had to raise the quality and performance of the computer itself. And here's what it looked like. And one of the things this picture shows you is what a boring metal box an embedded control computer is. All the interesting stuff is here, the keyboard and the display. And on the book, the cover of the book, you'll see the display showing the numbers on it. Anyhow, remember how boring that box is. That will become important again in a little bit. Okay, so how about celestial navigation in space, which should be sort of close to your hearts? We have a space sextant, which is somewhat like a nautical sextant, and a scanning telescope, which is like the old one your friend uses just to locate something in the sky, get the coordinates. So these don't look like it was in that cartoon, but you can get some position data by using the horizon of the Earth or the Moon and a star, or you can use pairs of stars to discover whether the platform holding the gyros and accelerometers is or is not exactly aligned with the axes of space as it should be. So why bother when inertial navigation is so good? Well, up to that time, inertial navigation had been invented for use in missiles, which don't spend much more than an hour or so flying, and airplanes that spend a small number of hours. But in spacecraft to go to the moon, you're up there for a week or 10 days, and the gyros do drift a little bit. So it needs some daily adjusting, and that's what this checking the orientation does. We also wanted to make sure that our spacecraft was completely independent, but finally realized, well, the Soviets are putting up spacecraft too, and if they screw our communications, they know we'll screw their communications, so that wouldn't do. And remember I mentioned Nathaniel Babbage, his descendant Phil Babbage was on our team during that time. So here's Doc Draper on the roof. This is East Cambridge, 75 Cambridge Parkway. Now it's all full of huge stuff. But that's Doc looking very happy, testing the ability to use the space sextant and the scanning telescope across the sky at that time. And basically, he's navigating spaceship Earth. So, the space race developed. Of course, it really began in 1957, but it sort of got going in 1959. The Russians got way ahead about the time NASA was born. They sent a spacecraft around the moon to show us pictures of the back side, which we know to be very different from the front side. Space flight, a lot of people said, hey, space flight is done with airplanes like the X-15. And it flew almost 200 flights during this period, but never went into orbit. Then we had Project Mercury. There were 6 flights, first 2 of which were suborbital, and that went on over those 3 years. On the Soviet side, Vostok, that's what Yuri Gagarin flew in. There were 6 flights, all orbital. They did send up 2 of them at once and tried to get them to rendezvous with each other in space, but without a computer on board, they couldn't manage. Pilots' instincts are just not the right ones for orbital mechanics. They did, however, put up the first woman cosmonaut, long before there was a woman astronaut. And once we'd sort of understood the importance of the rendezvous from what we had to do with Lunar Rendezvous, we dedicated this Gemini project with 2-man spacecraft to rendezvous. So there's the airplane approach. There's a B-52. It's just dropped an X-15 off, and off it goes to sort of the top of space. Here's a slightly fanciful picture of a Mercury spacecraft with just one guy in it. It's fanciful because there was never such a large window on a flying spacecraft. That's the museum configuration. Yuri Gagarin was in the this part of the Vostok spacecraft. And here are the 2 Geminis, Gemini 6 and Gemini 7, which used a computer to achieve a successful rendezvous. So we got that was kind of the first thing we were ever ahead on. Now, we'll go very quickly through what the whole vehicle looked like. Here's stage 1. These engines add up to 7.5 million pounds of thrust, which is just as well. When at this point, 1 1 1/3 million pounds of thrust is sufficient. For the third stage, 225,000 is enough. Here, this little ring, that's IBM's instrument unit with all the guidance and navigation for all this stuff. Up there's the LEM with its legs neatly folded, and up here, a shroud protecting it. Up here is the service module with its engine, and here's the command module. This is the only piece that comes home. And there's the launch escape system in case there's a booster problem and they had to abort early. We never had to, the Russians did once. So, let's see, there we are, let's try, that's better, okay. So here's what you do with the sextant in the one side of the command module. Now, how many people have done sextant navigation or taken star sights with the sextant? Okay, just a few. Well, you know, when you do that, it helps to have an assistant. So when you've got the thing lined up just so, you say mark, and your assistant notes down the time to the nearest second. It has to be quite accurate. And then you read the angle. And so then you go off and somehow work up the results of the sight. Well, when your partner is a computer, all you need is a single button called mark. And so when he's got the thing lined up, he hits that. The computer reads the clock. The computer reads the angles, does all the calculations. And so that that's how that is done. Now around this time, we always had this issue that being a piece of a university, there were a lot of people who thought this is really stupid. We should have a giant, capable corporation leading all these efforts. But here's this bunch of university weirdos that are doing it. And even in NASA headquarters, there's a team that came to visit us to consider whether we should be cut out of the program. And Dick Batten was the chief of the guidance engineering. So picture the scene. There's Dick sitting at his desk, and then there's a few tables, room enough for 4 guys on each side and somebody at the end. The window is open. It's a perfectly lovely spring morning. In comes a big, fat, lazy fly through the window. And it cruises down the edge of the length of the table till it gets to where Dick Batten is sitting at his desk. And he picks up his desk scissors, and snap, snips the fly in half. Wow. NASA guys never quite recovered their composure. And in fact, so the result was NASA said, okay, well, these guys at MIT seem to know what they're doing. We'll fix it so that if IBM's instrument unit in the rocket should ever fail completely, that the MIT system should be able to back it up. Okay, so if you're IBM, are you going to love that? Well, no, you're not. So IBM got a friendly consultation house to consider the question whether NASA should throw out our Apollo guidance computer completely and substitute a copy of the launch vehicle computer that goes with the Saturn. And of course, their friendly consultant said, well, yes, of course that's the right answer. But we knew better, and most of the NASA people knew better. And so we had to fly to Houston and play some big D's, some real defense, and be able to defend our role there. In the same year, that was all before the Manned Spacecraft Center opened. So later in the year, we did take a tour there. And of course, the big thing of 1963 toward the end was the assassination of Kennedy. And but the result within the lab was, look, this is an important project. It's Jack Kennedy's project. Let's just keep doing it and make it work. This is not a very focused picture, but it is that's kind of how the Mission Control Center looked then. All those screens here, they're 10 feet high, and there's several of them. Now during this time, Wernher von Braun, such an impressive guy, he tended to be given more stuff to do, or allowed to do more stuff than a lot of other leaders in somewhat specialized places. So he took a tour. And so we realized that embedded control computers are boring to look at. That was that metal box, right? So we got to do something better than just a bunch of flashing lights, which the box, of course, didn't even have. So what we did, and I won't take you through the details, we made what amounts to a little very simple video game that Von Braun could play with this thing. And he did. And he liked it. He did, that shows the computer is on the ball. And I could hear every MIT brain in the room saying, Danke schön, Wernher. That is exactly what it shows. So that was a good demo day. There you are. There's Doc Draper just telling Wernher exactly how everything is. Very typical of both of them. So the next piece of space race in the mid-60s, the Russians had a 2 or 3 cosmonaut vehicle called Voskod, and so they did a couple of flights for that. Our Gemini program, the 2 astronauts each, we actually had 10 flights in those 2 years, which is amazing to think about. But they did achieve the first rendezvous with the help of their computer. That was a little IBM computer, not ours. The Soviets had Luna mooncraft, and we talked earlier about 59, so they had a whole series called Luna that went to the moon and did various things. In 1966, the first one to land there, and also the first one to go into orbit around the moon. So they were kind of showing the way to the moon at that time. At the beginning of '67, disasters. The Apollo 1 crew, launch pad fire, and of course everybody is now seeing that on the movies that are coming out in this golden year of Apollo. And on the Russian side, the first Soyuz spacecraft to go up crash landed and killed its 1 crew member, 1 astronaut. So both sides had to take a deep breath and back off a little bit and, okay, let's make a little more certain of what's happening. But in the meantime, we had an unmanned LEM test in which our computer looked as if it wasn't really doing the right thing, but it wasn't our fault, so I just put that. We were involved to some extent in training astronauts. I won't get into any details there. I personally was allowed to attend the second launch of the big Saturn. And so a colleague and I, we stayed up all night copying numbers off screens, and then we went out on the fire escape when we were relieved. So there was nothing between us and the rocket except 3 miles of Florida air. And that, of course, was an incredible experience. And there's nothing you can build that will reproduce that sound. At this time, a lot of my engineering has sort of been done, so I got a life. I got back into sailing. Apollo 7, that was in October of that year. By that time, I was working future projects, although they did not yet become the Space Shuttle, which later. And then there was Apollo 8, reading of Genesis, and so in terms of the moon rise, I'm saying we're ahead for good. That was. Now that is not necessarily the flight I watched, and it certainly isn't the angle I watched it from. But it's one of the good NASA photos that we have to show, and it is a good one. In Apollo 8, we had the first appearance of the first photograph showing Earthrise over the moon. And so a lot of people feel a great deal of what we have learned to feel about our home planet was intensified by that image. Beginning in 1969, the Apollo 9 crew was getting ready to do the first manned LEM flight, although only in Earth orbit. So they came to the lab and figured they'd like to spend a couple of hours learning all about the Apollo guidance computer software. And at that point, because I had some time, so I was told to do that. So here's these 3 guys. They're sitting at the table in the conference room, ready to learn everything. And I come in lugging a book that is 1,700 pages thick. I saw 3 strong jaws droop. Just, we weren't careful what we asked for. So all I could do with that is I showed them. The book I'm showing was the stuff that my software prepared, and not only translated the program for the machine, but also had a nice alphabetical index of all the symbolic names for everything in the back. So I showed them how to find it around there. Then the Soviets, they're not lying down or falling over anything. They do the first rendezvous with docking. And the first time, the crew transfer, one of the cosmonauts walked across to the other spacecraft and went home in a different vehicle than the one he'd come up with. And then we had Apollo 10, the dress rehearsal that did everything to land on the moon. We had a few last-minute lessons to apply there. And then, what we didn't know until much later, but our spooky people know, our spies know, the Russians were developing a booster called N1, which had 24 rocket engines together until they decided, uh-oh, that's not enough. We'd better make it 30 rocket engines strapped together. And it was, they tried 4 tests of that, and it failed and exploded. Failed every time. So what they knew that we didn't was their chance of landing men on the moon had simply evaporated. But they didn't tell us that. So Apollo 11, as you certainly know from everything you see this year, it was perfect until the program alarms 1202 and 1201 say the Apollo Guidance computer is overworked. And for various reasons, we knew that it was okay, it was still flying, it was okay to go. It was a few miles off the target, not for that reason, but it was. And Armstrong, of course, goes down the ladder. And I don't know, I think people remember that what he thought he was saying, or what everybody thought he was saying was, that's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. But that word A didn't appear. We didn't hear that. And so in my book, I propose an electronic communication switching issue that explains why that might have been. It's partly guesswork on my part. Apollo 12 was struck by lightning during the boost, causing considerable chaos in all its electronics, but no actual damage. So it carried on and it landed right on the moon target. So no reliance on luck. Maybe there was some reliance on luck here. The Russians said there was. But with Apollo 12 landing right on target, the moon race is over. Here's a look at Apollo 11. I believe it's Buzz Aldrin has the camera, so that's Neil.
You sure that's not fake?
Well, no, people of course love to bring up that question, and there's a lot of good answers, including somebody who understands all about movie making pointed out that movie makers didn't have the capability at that time to do the effects you see here. My favorite answer is, look, Jack, there's 400,000 people around the world worked on this thing. Do you think a conspiracy can make them all tell the same lie the same way? I mean, what happens when 2 people try to keep a secret?
That's Apollo 15 or later.
This one is? Oh,
yeah,
you're right. The little antenna there,
flat
you're right, it is. It is.
I can see road wheels.
Yeah, that's true. We're going to get a better view of that in a few slides here. However, here's one that a slide I showed just for astronomically minded people. The upper stage of the Apollo 10 LEM, which did separate, it did go down near the moon, but it came up again without landing, because that's the way that was supposed to happen. And that ascent stage was called Snoopy. And when it was cast off into solar orbit. And I don't know whether the Phelps telescope is, whether that's a name well known to you, but there was a considerable project here where they tried to find it with a telescope, seeing this thing, because it's all nice shiny metal and it should show. However, the leader of the effort, being told it's like finding a needle in a haystack, he said this. The other derelict is in Apollo 12, that third booster stage, the S4B. When it separated, it went into Earth orbit, well inside the moon. Does everybody know from Lagrangian points? Mm-hmm. Okay. So this is L1 of the Earth-Sun system, I'm pretty sure, which somehow slung that thing into a solar orbit. And then, some period later, it came back to the neighborhood where L1 could recapture it. into an Earth orbit. I find this a just amazing story just by itself. 500K miles from Earth, so it's twice as far away as the moon is. But it has been spotted as a magnitude 16.5 object. And the reason we know it's the right thing is that nothing else out there is made of titanium oxide. So it's in Earth orbit at a period of 43 days. Anybody ever seen it?
I wish the TO didn't.
Okay, so that's the derelict story. In 1970, of course, we know that there was the Apollo 13 issue, and I'd like to point out, just to tease people who have a thing about the number 13, the time of liftoff was 13:13 Central Standard Time, the time we used there. And on 13, Houston, we've had a problem. So this LOX tank in the service module exploded. No more water, no more power, no way to use the big engine on the service module. So the LEM became a lifeboat. The LEM's descent engine, the one on the descent stage, became the locomotive. And the command module was left to be cold and wet. One thing about spacecraft you don't think of is you have sweaty astronauts in there, and they just keep raising the humidity. I guess the systems take some of it out, but there's a heck of a lot of water floating around in there. And so the batteries in the command module had to be saved for entry. So the movie Apollo 13 showed the story quite accurately, although one of the, I saw Fred Hayes present this in Washington, and the kid at question time said, you know, how did you like the movie? Do you think it was accurate? And he said, yeah, it was really pretty good, quite accurate, except for one thing. The movie has, if you remember seeing the movie, the three astronauts, when they're figuring out what to do, get very animated and excited and upset and not quite angry with each other, but really quite excited and upset. And Fred Hayes says, that's not how it was at all. If you'd been in the spacecraft with us, you'd have thought three businessmen were having a planning conference. And because astronauts do that, they keep their heads in a way that most of us don't ever have to do. But of course, in a movie, you've got to help the audience understand what's going on behind those exteriors. Toward the end of the mission, I wrote some emergency code which helped separate the lunar module from the command module. But it turns out it wasn't needed because there's a little air pressure in the tunnel between them, and that popped them apart in the required way. This is a terrible picture as far as focus goes, but that's the picture they made of the service module with all its guts hanging out of that side. So the space race during this time, there were 7 flights for Apollo, 2 of which were landings on the moon. The Soviets, they put up 7 manned flights of Soyuz, including at one point 3 of them orbiting at the same time, which is an interesting exercise in mission control. They had a number of unmanned Luna flights, 2 of which were intended to bring back little bits of moon completely automatically. And one of those actually crashed on the moon while the Apollo 11 crew was on the surface. And I'll bet you're never going to hear that, even in this golden year of Apollo. That's true. And one of those delivered the first lunar rover, the autonomous lunar rover, Lunar. In 71, sort of went better for us. Apollo 14 had a ghost in the body, had a piece of metallic contamination, which seemed, which in zero gravity was cause abort button signals to happen from time to time. And this was fortunately discovered at a time when the computer wasn't listening to that. So we worked, my good friend Don Isles produced a suitable workaround. Alan Shepard took a golf club to the moon. He hit the ball and said, oh, that went miles and miles. Okay, astronauts are very good and reliable when they're doing their technical job. As golfers, they're just as big liars as the rest of them. Maybe 400 yards. So the Soviets started doing space stations, Salyut 1, But then they sent up a Soyuz and could not rendezvous with it, so we still had some problems with that. The next one took 3 cosmonauts to Salyut. They stayed for a while, came home, and their Soyuz depressurized, so they all landed dead. By this time, I was working on a group for fault tolerance, which was for the Space Shuttle. Apollo 15 was a longer mission with 2 firsts, vehicle, and the TV. So this is, this demonstrates the gentleman was saying there. So that's the rover. It's got this nice antenna, whereby it can send live TV of the lunar liftoff here. I'm pretty sure all these colors have to do with using a color wheel. So some things flew out while the blue part of the color wheel was passing by. That looks like a disaster, but no, that's a legitimate lunar liftoff. Around this time, we're talking 1969-70 here, MIT students took the view, well, let's see, MIT laboratories do missiles. Missiles are bad, therefore MIT labs are bad. And so they made a great deal of noise to that effect. And so the instrumentation lab was split off and became a separate company, the Charles Stark Draper Laboratory Incorporated, and it is now quite a powerhouse in an area called Technology Square. Nixon, having no imagination to speak of, wasn't going to do anything. The Soviets got interested mostly in space stations as a way of resuming the arms race in space. Nixon advertised the Space Shuttle as incredibly cost-effective, that it would just, cut the cost of sending stuff into space by a factor of 10 or 50 or whatever he said. And that really worried the Soviets because they knew that was total bull feathers. So there must be some deep, dark secret there. That's what they thought. In 72, here I have to give Nixon a little bit of credit. He, like a child playing one parent against the other, he opened up relations with China, pushing USSR aside a little bit. Around this time also Apollo 16 visited Lunar Highlands and really harvested a really good rock group, taking the word literally this time. Then Nixon went over to Russia and started talking to Kosygin about the Apollo-Soyuz test program, a joint effort that China couldn't have any part of. So he was driving some wedges there. Let's give him a little credit for that. CSDL, the Charles Stark Draper Lab, worked on Space Shuttle avionics and how to make them fault tolerant. Then Apollo 17 was the final manned visit to the moon. A real geologist, Jack Schmidt, and he took the photo called the Blue Marble. Well, so around this time, we were starting, we at the lab, the group I was a part of, started working with North American Rockwell, which had become Rockwell International Space Division, on the design of the Space Shuttle computer system to make it fault tolerant. And those guys would travel around the country and have somewhat disorganized presentations, which brings us to another song. There was Devil and Lawler, Peller, O'Hearn, Rubinson, and McQuaid, and never an agreement was the 6 of them had made. Whenever they got together, the shouting it was grand, when shouting around the country as the Space Division band. So, if you like McNamara's band, you got to love these guys. They were actually good, smart people mostly, but they didn't do things the way we do. Okay, so in 1973, we have the only purely United States space station, and we'll have another look at that in a moment. There were 3 visits made to it, all using Apollo spacecraft with our guidance, our computer, everything. It was just the next chapter in the life of our Apollo system, even though it was only in going to Earth orbit. The Russians orbited a station they call Salyut 2, and it's in quotes because it was a military Red Army outpost. They didn't do very much with it. They did have another major launch failure of a spy satellite. But they did finally make a Soyuz design that wouldn't kill everybody, so they were able to test that a little bit. And this little bit, if I may just put in a little story there, the IBM was wired to be the supplier of the computer for the space shuttle. And they came and presented their design to us. And I sat there and you know, most of it was pretty good. It certainly would run it a lot faster than an Apollo guidance computer, with one exception. The long divide, the long word 64-bit by 64-bit divide, just took for bloody ever. And I said, excuse me, I can beat that with the subroutine using your short divide. And they said, can you indeed? Well, you better show us. So a week later, I sent them the code to do that. And they turned up a couple of months later with the computer called the AP101B, which did the divide a lot faster. That was my turn as the mouse that roared. So, anyhow, here's the Skylab. This, after it's been repaired somewhat, one wing was torn off during launch. This is the other wing. This thing is the parasol. It's made out of gold foil. They had to recreate some thermal insulation between the outside and the inside. But they did use it and got a lot of good work done. In '74, because we were working on the shuttle and weren't ready to go yet, only Russians were in space. The thing they called Salyut 3, which was really Almaz 2, they orbited that with a gun. I mean, a Red Army outpost should have a gun, right? You've seen that. Now, what they were planning to do with it isn't clear to me, and I don't think it was clear to them. And when it came time to deorbit this thing, they simply pointed it the right way, fired all the ammo in the gun, took the rotational energy out of it, and it fell into the atmosphere and burned up. So that's part of learning that regular warfare doesn't really make much sense in space. Our test project, the joint work with the Soviets, progressed sort of smoothly because we left Vietnam by that time. And we're irritating in that way. Salyut 4 was a real station. And fault tolerance, this means we could allow 2 units, even of the same kind, to fail, and the thing would still be able to operate. So fail operational, fail safe. I won't go into the details of that. Except to say we had to synchronize machines that were not designed or built to be synchronized and make them vote to detect indicators. So this is the end of the space race, 1975. The Soviets sent a couple of crews to stay in Salyut 4 for a while. They prepared for this program with a flight that would have been called Soyuz some number of it, except for the fact that it had a problem. And when Soviet programs have a problem, they do not get a number. And so they refer to it rather delicately as the April 5th anomaly. And it was really something. They launched the Soyuz on top of the booster. They tried to separate. It didn't quite separate. So they had to do all kinds of irregular stuff to get this whole stuff free of the booster. And it landed sort of properly, but not where it should have. It landed in the mountains between Soviet Union and China. But anyhow, but what's remarkable is that because Congress knew that was in preparation for this thing, the Congress of the United States demanded a fuller account from the Soviet Space Agency of what had happened to their flight. Strange way to run a Cold War, if you ask me. So the one that worked, this one, was called Soyuz 19. Here's a sort of interface adapter. So the two, once they joined up in orbit, the two skippers floated through, shook hands in the middle, and I say the space race itself was then over. The space activities became much more cooperative after that. However, there's just a few more comments to make about the shuttle. That was the final part thing with our computer and our guidance system. Space Shuttle did some approach and landing tests before they did orbital flights. They got on to doing the orbital flights, and we all know pretty much what they did. They took up the European Space Lab, was sitting in the cargo bay. They put up and then repaired the Hubble telescope. They took up pieces to make the International Space Station. But all this time, the Soviets knew, in quotes, that the Space Shuttle was really a secret weapon, and they couldn't guess what the hell it was for. And they said, well, if they've got one, we'd better have one too, and as soon as we find out what it's for, we'll make ours do that. So that's the comparison. It was a pretty good copy, as such things go. That's Braun on the bottom. So, anyhow, so space stations kind of took over here. USSR decided to put one up called Peace, Mir, which is peace, rather than this somewhat military sounding salute. It occurred in the military stations are pretty useless. And our national space station called Freedom got transmuted into International Space Station Alpha, which we just call the ISS now. The Soviets had a plan for a second generation Mir, and they said, oh, the heck with it, let's just join the International Station. Japan joined in, so space is now International Antarctica, and so there you are. That's me with the Apollo 12 capsule in a museum in Virginia, and of course that's the space shuttle going off, and you know who that is.
So,
yes.
You'll be happy to know there's a very nice set of current YouTube videos of people who've been making a AGC work again.
Ah, yes.
And so there is one that is in functioning condition at this point.
Yes.
They're building their own disk key for it. They've had one problem in the memory module, and other than that, it works.
That's right, yeah. It's Stewart, Mike Stewart. So that's right. I mean, the history definitely lives on. And I'm in fact involved in a project with a fellow who lives in the north of France. He's building a hardware clone of the AGC. But he and I are working together on what would have been AGC Block 3 if I'd been allowed in 1968 to make a yet better one. That's what it would have been. So it's pure pipe change stuff. It's loads of fun. So yes, the culture does go on. Yes.
On Apollo 11, when Neil Armstrong was landing, and he's getting these computer abort signals
Alarm signals all aboard.
And the word I've heard was that it was Draper Lab that said, "Don't worry about it, go ahead and land."
Well, one of our people in the backup control room did say that, but he was really taking second place, Jack Garman of NASA. What had happened was that Gene Krantz and his team, who were the pilot and were the controllers at the time, a couple of weeks earlier, they had run a test in which he had deliberately, Gene Krantz had deliberately said to the testing doctor, look, throw in all these alarms we never heard of, and let's see what people do about them. And Steve Bales, then Flight Dynamics Officer, saw this happening and he called for an abort. So afterwards, Krantz said, okay guys, did we have to do that abort or didn't we? And they reviewed all the evidence and decided that actually they didn't. And despite the alarm, there was nothing really wrong with the flying of the vehicle. And so that's how they learn. And so Krantz, as part of this effort, told Jack Garman to make a sort of crib sheet of all these numerical alarms. They'd never seen them, never expected to see them. But Jack made a sort of one-page dictionary of what they are and what they imply. So when the problem happened, the crew on Apollo 11 said to Houston, can give us a reading on that alarm, please. And so Steve Bales or whoever it was got in touch with Jack Garman and said, Jack, what about this one? Jack says, that's okay, go. And our Russ Larson, our guy there, agreed. And I conferred, yes, go. So that's what you heard. And
that came from Houston, not from MIT.
Okay, yeah. So Jack Garman, who is now deceased, I'm sorry to say, but he was just a great guy. And, so he was the one who put together the authoritative. Yes.
Can you comment on the navigation of Apollo 13 on its return?
Well, okay. In the first place, the movie suggested that mission control was totally totally uncharted waters. That wasn't quite true. There had been some planning on how to use the line of life. The mission itself was designed so that once you're through translunar injection heading for the moon, if you didn't do anything else, you would swing around the moon on what they call a free return. You can come back to Earth. So they had very, very little in the way of adjustments to make. So on the way back, well, one thing that I think is very significant is that our software is very kind of general purpose because normally the software in the lunar module was expecting to operate the combined lunar module, ascent and descent stages together, or the ascent stage by itself. But having that software run all of that plus the command module and the service module, what that meant among other things is the center of gravity, instead of being right here, was way out there. And the software had been deliberately written to cope with any such situations. And so they were able to continue controlling the thing on the way back. That's the main story. The other thing that was a little odd when they got back near the Earth, of course, they had to cast off the service module, separate it from the command module, and then they took that picture that I showed you. But then the command module and the lunar module was still together. So that's the thing that I was going to write some code to help separate. But as I say, we didn't actually need to do that. But they managed to get right down the middle of the corridor, the re-entry corridor. So there wasn't really uncertainty about the correctness of their entry and landing. So, right there.
About how many people were in the instrument lab team within the AGC?
It's a number of hundreds. I think the people working on hardware, and I'm not sure they were all labs, maybe some were Raytheon and AC, but I think that got up to about 700, and then they got their work done, and the software people, we kept taking on software contractors to help us out. In defiance of Brooks' Law, perhaps you know Fred Brooks' Law, adding people to a late project makes it later. But we really didn't have a choice. We had to add the people to get the work done, and it would get done when it got done. And so the great success, I think, of the software work particularly is that all the people writing the software were together in one building. If you wanted to know something, trot down the hall a few yards and you get your answer. None of this stuff about routing problems to a department or all that stuff that you have to do with bigger organizations. So we all lived in each other's pockets. We all worked all day and half the night because we loved what we were doing so much. And so we all basically loved and trusted each other, and we were there to help each other succeed. And we just never deviated from that principle. That's a lot of what made it work.
I remember that you put up on one of the first slides something about systems thinking or systems integration.
Yeah.
And I think I remember that there was something like 1 million parts for Apollo mission. Anyway, it's a very large number.
Yeah.
Is there anything special, magic, interesting technology about the systems integration? I think that was a separate contract, wasn't it?
Well, I really don't know about that. If it was a separate contract, I don't really know about that. It was sort of a separate effort in the sense that you presumably know about critical path method. Maybe you've used it. So, you know that it used to be called PERT, Project Evaluation Review Technique. So using a software database to keep track of all the parts and mostly all the processes, and to keep track of what had to be done before this other thing could be done and who would be available to do it. all that was a something of a leap forward in itself to keep track of all that stuff. So that was the main thing. So, any further questions?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I just wanted to remind everyone that Hugh has books for sale, and he's willing to sign any that I've purchased, or if you've already bought one and you brought it, you could probably sign that too. So thank you very much, everyone, for your attention. Great questions, great presentation. Thank you, Hugh. And I want to thank Glenn for refreshments, and Maria also. I think she's brought pie. So please enjoy the rest of your evening, and thanks for joining us. Have a great night.